Good morning. I am happy to be here. I have not been to this congregation, to this church before in my 5 years now with the Ohio Conference. I apologize for line of sight. I'll move a little bit so that if you can't see me right now, maybe I'll move around and you can see me a little later. Okay? As the conference minister for the Ohio Conference of the United Church of Christ, I'm all about connections. And it really pleases me to come to a congregation and to hear, yeah, a group just got back from Mexico doing mission work in the name of the church. Yeah, there are cleanup kits going to West Virginia as part of the churches of the United Church of Christ in Ohio, working together to make sure we're ready for emergencies. And today, one great hour of sharing is all about connection. As Kevin said, as we make our donations, this special offering today goes almost 100% toward relief and long-term development work, because we've already covered the structural infrastructure kinds of things through our regular offerings, through our church's wider mission. So as we give today, we have collected across all of our congregations a pool of money for things like tsunami relief someplace in the world, things like earthquake relief, things like flood relief in Ohio and West Virginia, wherever there is a disaster or wherever there's long-term mission or ministry to be taken care of. That's what our connectionalism as people of faith, brothers and sisters across this conference, can do. So thank you for that. I wanted to share that before I started. Well, today, if you folks up in Worcester, you celebrate Lent, haven't you? I mean, that's not just a Columbus thing. Across our conference, we're all in Lent now, and I think they're in the same time zone. This is the 4th Sunday in Lent. So we're right in the middle of things, if you're along with the church calendar. Lent is a wilderness time, metaphorically speaking. The time when we find ourselves kind of in a desert. It's a time of self-reflection, a time of discernment, a time where some of us try and free ourselves a little bit from distraction and from self-centeredness. Begins with Ash Wednesday. Did you do that here? Do you do that little thing with the ashes on the forehead? And you find that you go home and it doesn't quite rub off because there's oil in the ashes, so you're wandering around the rest of the day with a little mark on your forehead. But it's a reminder for us. We hear the words, dust to dust. From dust you were made, to dust you will return. And it's a countercultural reminder that we are God's people. We are part of the created order. We are not always as powerful as our culture wants to tell us that we are. It's a very humbling kind of period. It reflects Moses' 40 days in the wilderness, in the desert, leading his band. But that wasn't just lost time. That was time when they were gathering together as a community. They were getting the 10 Commandments. They were learning who they were as a people. It's also reminiscent of Jesus' time in the wilderness, where he's at the beginning of his ministry. He's out in the wilderness. He's tempted. He's fasting. And it's a time of self-generation for him, self-definition, understanding his ministry that's going to begin now. You and me, we don't particularly like wilderness times, I'm guessing. I'm from Iowa. Anybody else from Iowa? Anybody else from the Great Plains? Anybody ever driven across Iowa, Nebraska, South Dakota, Colorado? Kind of a long way. And I like corn, but there's only so much of it as you're driving by that you want to see. That's why they call those regions the flyover states. You want to just fly over them and forget about them. We don't like being in wilderness of corn. We don't like being in the wilderness of discouragement or depression or illness. We want to take a pill to get out of it. We want to distract ourselves. Sometimes we even self-medicate through alcohol or drugs. We don't want to suffer an uncomfortable time. But I'm saying this morning that there can be value in that downtime. It can be a time of self-examination. It can help us focus. It can help us sense God's presence in a way that, those bright moments and the distracted moments you can't. I was injured 15 years ago in a bicycle accident. I was the bicycle. And for a while, several months, even years after that, all I could see was the negative. All I could see was the loss. All I could see was the wilderness, what I can't do now. But it took some time to get a broader perspective and to look at an experience of disability, not all as loss, but some of it as new perspective, as appreciating limitation, of understanding myself in relationship to God and other people through community. So it wasn't all bad. Today's scripture lessons, they both started out rather poetically with the people wandering in wilderness, aimlessly in exile. We are a lost people. We are lost to sin. Have you ever felt lost in your life? Have you ever felt those moments of pointlessness? What's it all about? Why am I here? I'm going to try out on you a bumper sticker. The folks at the early service this morning didn't get it. They didn't have their coffee yet, but I'm sure you'll be better at it than they will. My favorite bumper sticker, one of my favorites, is, "Where are we going? And what's with this handbasket?" Think about it. Talk to somebody who's laughing. You'll get it. It's a good one. It's one of those subtle ones. I'll go on. The response in both the Psalm and in Ephesians, though, is a real turnaround. God telling God's people that you are not abandoned in the wilderness. God sends a search party out looking for you, and in that time you can encounter a deeper relationship with the Holy. Annie Dillard writes, "God suffers the world's necessities along with us." God suffers the world's necessities, limitations, problems. God suffers the world's necessities along with us, and suffers our turning away, and joins us in exile. We are never in exile from God's self. As the conference minister for the Ohio Conference, I spend a lot of time thinking about congregations and church life. We had a lovely time with the youth this morning in between services, and some of the reflections that we made there I'm going to share with you here also. I'm going to say that church life today, we are wandering in a wilderness in terms of numbers, declining numbers, in terms of financial challenges as churches, in terms of assumptions that we used to hold true and no longer seem to hold as true, in terms of anxiety about what all this means, and a sense of dis-ease about how to be church today. I want to do a little exercise with you. If you remember these times, raise your hand. Okay? Do you remember the time, just to illustrate what I'm talking about, when stores were closed on Sunday mornings so you could go to church? Now, up in the youth gallery up here, there aren't any hands raised. Do you remember a time on Sunday morning when the schools had no sporting events on Sunday mornings, Sunday all day, maybe Wednesday night, because you had to go to church? Do you remember a time when, this might be a little older, when you learned the prayers from your church, maybe in school, because we were all learning the same prayers together? That goes back a little ways, maybe. Do you remember a time when pews and parking lots of all the mainline churches were full? You build a church and they will come. That's an Iowa reference, by the way. Field of Dreams, Dyersville, Iowa. If you build it, they will come. Do you remember a time, this is a good one, do you remember a time the newscaster was spinning off on Friday night because he wouldn't be back again until Monday, and he says to you at the end of the broadcast on Friday night, attend the church of your choice. And you did, because when Walter Cronkite told you to do something, you did it. It was assumed, he assumed, we all assumed, yeah, we're going to be a church. Of course we are. Do you remember when the minister's sermons, maybe not only the good ones, but all of them, were printed in the newspaper on Sunday morning because the papers assumed that people would want to read them, and they did. That happened. Not a lot of us remember those. Do you remember when you moved to a new town and you were expected to join the church because of your profession, whatever it might be? A particular kind of church, maybe the Presbyterian church, maybe the Congregational, maybe the Baptist church. But the expectation was that as a business, again, probably a man, you would join a church and you would bring your family with you. Things are changing. We were normative. We were the establishment. After all, we built our congregations, we built our church buildings downtown on the city square. Now, driving into Worcester, I'm not sure where you're located, but I'm pretty sure you're not out on the edge of town someplace. You're right downtown, and that's not an accident. You were geographically and culturally central. We were mainline. Now we tend to be peripheral, sideline, in terms of our influence on culture. In fact, some have described Christianity as sort of a colony nowadays, clumped together, surrounded by a culture that no longer is mutually supportive of us and our values, and sometimes even hostile to our values. In fact, it's more like the first century church of apostles, who were surrounded by a Roman culture that wasn't particularly supportive of the expansion of Christian faith until the 4th century. Phyllis Tickle writes that this is kind of the end of Christendom. Christendom began when the Emperor Constantine just decreed that everybody in his Roman Empire was Christian now, whether they knew it or not. And we basically stayed in that culture in the West up until these days. Even though we have an officially secular culture, a separation between church and politics here in the United States, culturally we have seen ourselves in this Western world as a Christian culture. Well, that assumption is fading with diversity, with immigration, with all kinds of reasons going on. We can no longer claim that. Phyllis Tickle writes that we are in a 500-year, what she calls a rummage sale. Every 500 years, she says, everything in the church is thrown up and changes around. Everything that's not nailed down, and even some things that are nailed down, are up for grabs. 500 years ago, we had the Protestant Reformation. 500 years before that, we had the great schism between the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholic Church. Every 500 years, huge changes happen. And she says that things are so in transition today that this is one of those big changes. May or may not be true. We won't know for a few hundred years. I'm going to stick around and see. I don't know about you. But it is a huge hinge of history, a crack in history going on. But if our scriptures from this morning are true, if our Lenten scriptures are true, that's not necessarily a bad thing. This is not the end of time. This is the beginning of a new time. And we are poised to be part of that new rebirth if we can be flexible enough, if we can be open enough, if we can listen to what the young people up in the peanut gallery may say as they grow up. You know, we will find ourselves with God's Spirit on the other side of this great transition. One of the values of this time is that we are learning what the church is not. And I think over the last 50 years, 100 years, we have gotten lazy as congregations. We are learning, for example, that the church is not just a social club. It's great to get together on Sunday mornings, to see